Trent Wortham with WCI Consulting. Thank you for joining today. We have people joining right now, but we will go ahead and get started as it is after 10:30. Here at WCI Consulting, we focus on business intelligence. We have since 1998. Our main software we work with is BusinessObjects, but we do work with a multitude of different areas within the business intelligence community. Right now I have up our mission statement. Today we're going to be going over security for business intelligence. We're going to be working on the BusinessObjects software, and our consultant Neil Dave will be presenting part 1 of this 2-part series. The next one is February 7th, and if you got an email about this one, you should get an email about that one. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Neil, and he will be able to present Security Part 1 of Business Intelligence presented by WCI Consulting. Thank you.
Thanks, Trent. So as Trent mentioned there, we're going to talk a little bit about Rowlevel Security today, and this, again, is the first part of a 2-part series. And it's interesting to note that within BusinessObjects, there's so many different ways you can restrict data that a user needs to see, and like Trent mentioned, that the second part of it will go into different details about that. So what we're going to talk about today here is on the universe side of BusinessObjects, and so before we kind of get into Rowlevel Security, there's a couple things you need to set up in order to get Rowlevel Security going. So for some of you guys that are not familiar with what a universe is, the universe is a semantic layer between the database and the actual user using the object for the query. It will hide the database structure from the user, which basically means that the end user will not see this screen at all. They will not have access to be able to view this. So what they're concerned with is here on the left side, these different objects that they will drag and drop into the report in order to run their query. So in order for you to have this set up, what you've got to do is a couple of things. First, you have to create a connection, a universe connection, that allows BusinessObjects to talk to your database. And how that's done is simply by going to File, Parameters, and click on New. And once you go to the New Connection Wizard, you'll notice that there's several different types of databases that you can connect to. For example, you have an IBM database, an Oracle database, SAP, and a Microsoft database. So if I gave it a name, just as an example, and if I click on the Microsoft and choose SQL Server 2008, I can choose an ODBC connection and click on Next. And then in here, what I can do is I can select my username, password, and my data source name or the database that I'm trying to connect to by using this tool right here. So that's what you have to make sure that you have connected first in order for you to build your schema here. And once you've got that connected, then you can start bringing in your tables by using the table browser. And once you've brought in your tables, then you can create your joins in order to join your tables up properly and then start creating your objects. So from there, you'll create your objects that, again, like I mentioned earlier, that the end users will view. So once you've got that set up, then we can start talking about row-level security. So what row-level security is when you want to specify what rows of data each user or group is permitted to retrieve from the database. So how you do that is by simply going to Tools, up here, Manage Security, and then Manage Access Restrictions. Now you'll notice here I've already got a couple in here that we've got set up. So I'll talk a little bit about these a little bit later on. But what you've got here in this screen is the restrictions are here, the restriction names that I've provided here. And then on the right side is the groups or users, end users, excuse me, that we will place those restrictions on. Okay? So in order to set this up first, you click on New right here on the left side. And what that does is it brings you up to a new panel. And what you see here is it gives you a restriction name. You can change the name into whatever you want. And then this first tab here gives you a different connection. So for example, what this will allow you to do is you can set a restriction on a connection. So for an example, if you had if you have users that have just one universe and they have multiple database connections that they need to get to, you can set up a restriction here to only allow those users to view a specific data type or database source by setting up a restriction in here. So it doesn't necessarily have to be row-level security. You can also do different types of restrictions by going to the screen. So that's what you can have here for connection. For controls, you can also set up a control to say that this group or user can only retrieve a result set size of 90,000 rows or 5 minutes. Again, you can adjust this however you want. You have the ability to do that in here. SQL, the SQL tab, you can restrict a user to only if they were allowed to use subqueries, or if they're allowed just these different types of SQL features here. If you want to allow them to have these abilities to do that, then you can do that. If you don't want to, you can restrict them to not be able to do that kind of thing. Next tab here is objects. So like I mentioned earlier, when you create your objects, you can restrict the different types of objects that the user can view. An example would be if the user is not allowed to, if you have a user that does not need to view Social Security information or salary information for employees, you can restrict that object in here by saying that please don't allow this user to view that specific object. Okay? Rows we'll get to here in a minute, and then lastly, table mappings is basically table mappings allow you to replace a table reference in the universe by another table. All right, so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the restrictions that we have set up in place right now. One thing that the importance of row-level security is basically to allow where you have one universe created, and then you have multiple of users that are hitting that one universe, are running reports off that universe, and you're restricting the data that they can see. So again, another example of this would be like HR information, or the HR group can only view HR data that's against this one universe. Same with VPs. If you have VPs that are only allowed to view, if you want to restrict the access to only allow VPs to look at certain types of data, you can set that up in here. That's the importance of this. You're looking at one universe, and you're setting up all these restrictions on one universe to allow certain groups of people to look at their design data. Okay? So what I've done here is I've already set up 3 restrictions, and I've set up 3 users in order to achieve row-level security. So what I did here is Anderson, Larry, and Steve restrictions. These are sales managers within this universe called eFashion. What we've done is we're restricting them to only look at their specific data based on them being a sales manager. And that's going to make sense here a little bit later when we run a report that has that information for them. Okay? So under Anderson, if I click on Edit here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the Row tab, and then you'll see a restricted table on here. What that's telling me is that the table that was mapped into my schema, I'm going to make sure that it's pointing to that table, and then I'm going to create a where clause that allows them to restrict it to only return Anderson data. So if I click on Modify here, what you would do is you would identify the table that you want the restriction to be placed on. You just click on the 2 arrows right here, and then it gives you the list of tables here. Select the appropriate table. Once you've done that, here I've got Outlet Lookup here, and then when I click on the 2 arrows here, I can start creating my SQL statement off of that. And then you'll notice here under the Outlook Lookup table, it gives me the table name and then all the columns associated with that table. And then all I would have to do is just double-click on the manager column, and then it will provide me with that information. And then lastly, what I would do is I set it up to where I only want to restrict to Anderson. So Anderson is the name of a manager here that that we're going to restrict the data for. Okay? Once I've done that, okay, once that's been done, then to verify that your SQL is done properly or syntax properly, you click on the Check All button, and you'll notice that's okay. So my SQL is okay there, and then I just hit OK, and I'm done with that restriction. Same thing with the Larry restriction. So if I click on Edit here, you'll notice that I've got I've set it up to where it's the same table, the same column here, and then this time the only difference is I set it up to where Larry is where it's restricted. Now, one important thing about this is that when you're setting this up, make sure that that it's spelled correctly, because these things this is case sensitive. So if you have Larry in your database as lowercase l, A-R-R-Y, it's not going to pick it up in this case. So it's case sensitive, so if you're going to hard code data in here, you have to make sure that it matches your database value. Right? And same thing goes with Steve. So if I click on edit, you'll see here for Steve, I've got the same database restriction associated to it. All right? Now here on the right side, like I mentioned, this is where you're going to set the actual users or groups that will be restricted to. So now if I click on add users or groups, what this does is it brings me to another screen. It's bringing up all the users and groups that are associated within BusinessObjects. Now in order for you to set up users and groups, you have to, that's done within a tool called the Central Management Console. And once that, you set up the users and groups in there, and then from there, the universe will pick up all the changes or all the groups that have been that are in the screen. So it'll automatically pick it up for you. Now, one thing I will note is if you have a restriction, you'll notice that here we're only restricting on users. But if you have, what I recommend, if you have one type of restriction for multiple users, I recommend that within the CMC you associate those users to a group. And the reason why you would do that is then from here, and when you get to this screen, you can associate a specific group. For example, this reporting, the managers underscore group here. If you click on that group, it's going to pick up the restriction for all those users that are part of that group. Okay? So once you've identified all the users or groups that you want associated to the restrictions, all you would do is just simply highlight their name, click on the arrow right here, and list them out here. All right? After you've done that, what you're going to do is now that you've got your restrictions in place, you've got your groups and users, now you have to identify which ones you're going to apply the restriction to. That's simply done by clicking on the Anderson restriction, in our case here, then click on Anderson name, and then hit the apply button. So that's why I strongly recommend if you're going to have multiple restrictions for a universe, that you make your universe or your restriction name as close as possible to the group name or the username, so you don't get confused on what restrictions you have on here. So that's why I make it easier for you to hit the apply button and associate the groups to the user. And same with Larry. So what I would do here is for Larry, I would highlight Larry here, and then Larry here, hit apply. Same with the Steve restriction, and Steve here, hit apply, and then I'm good to go. One thing you can do to make sure that you put in the right restriction is click on this preview button. And what the preview button is going to do, it's going to look at this restriction to let you know that everything's been set up correctly. In this case, it tells me that, okay, I'm looking at the Steve restriction, and it's telling me that the restriction for Steve is on this outlet lookup manager column, and it's set to Steve. So it looks like I'm good here, and you can do that for all these other ones as well when you click on the preview button. All right? So once you've got that done, the next thing you can do is, if you feel like once you're done with all your restrictions, you can go to File, Export, and then export it out to the repository. Once you've exported it out to the repository, now you're able to run your reports now. And so that's what we're going to do. We've already got it set up to where we have the restrictions in place, and we've already created a report. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the report for you as the administrator and show you all the different data that it returns, and then we'll run them for each individual user. And then you'll see the restriction put in place. So first we're going to log into InfoView as the administrator. All right, and then I'm going to go to Document List. And under Public Folders, Report Samples, and then Rowlevel Security. Just going to double click on it. All right, and then I'm going to refresh the data here. And you'll notice that all the managers here have been listed out, and the store names that they're associated to, the year, the quantity sold, and the sales revenue. So if I scroll down here, You'll see all the manager names here on the left side, and then all the stores that they're associated to, the year, the quantity sold, and then the sales revenue. So this is all the data I'm seeing for this report. Okay? So now if I log out, okay, the first person I'm going to log in as is Larry. And the password. All right. Now what I did is I set up some preferences here to view the actual folder here, as opposed to what you saw on the previous screen where I had to perform a couple of clicks here to get to that point. But in here, I just set up a preference to allow you to go straight to the report folder. So all I did is just double click on revenue, or I'm sorry, Rowlevel Security, and then refresh the data. And now you'll see for Larry, the name of the manager is Larry, the store name, the year, quantity sold, and sales revenue. All right, so that's how I'm restricting data for Larry. So like I said, if Larry logs into the computer or logs in and tries to run a report, he'll be restricted to only viewing his set of information based off of that restriction we put in place. Okay. So now if I log in as Anderson, all right, so in that folder, just double click on it. Go ahead, refresh data, and Anderson's name is right here as the name of the manager, and he can only see his quantity sold and sales revenue for that specific store for those 3 years. All right. And lastly, when I log in as Steve, I'm going to run the report as Steve, and that's the information he sees right there. This is only the information that Steve can see for the report. Now, one last thing I would add on this is whenever you're building the query for this, what we did is we put the name of the manager as a query. So we have an object called name of manager. I'm going to go back into the universe and show you that. Right here is name of the manager. So that's where, if you're trying to understand where is that picking it up from, in our report, I threw in the name of the manager into our report in order for us to identify the restriction. So yes, that manager name in this case would have to be on here in order for the report to run. Okay? Well, I thank you for your time, and Trent, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Neil. Neil, we have a first question come in here. If you have any questions, folks, please put them into the question panel on your right-hand side. What if you do not know what restrictions you need to put on before you run it, like an employee ID or something? Is there a way to get around that?
Yeah, there is a way of doing that. We'd have to talk offline on how to do that, but it would be not as straightforward as applying the Rowlevel Security. That's something we'd have to talk about offline.
Right, and that may also be addressed in the part 2 of security, where we would be, it might be folder access or something like that, right, Neil?
That's correct.
Okay. If there are any other questions, please go ahead and submit them. Otherwise, we will go ahead and wrap up this webinar. We'll call it a little bit short. If you guys have any questions that you think of, put up our contact information up there on the screen now. And we look forward to seeing you on February 7th for part 2, which will deal with a greater strategy out of the general security for reporting on business intelligence. it doesn't look like any more questions have come in, so thank you for attending, everybody, and we will see you in 2 weeks.